here in the Middle East. I'm joined today with two distinct speakers and colleagues. We have Cornelius Matthes, who's the CEO of Dii Desert Energy, of course, Dii standing for Desert Tech Industrial Initiative, as well as Anita Nouri, who is the Chief Executive Officer of Green Energy Solutions and Sustainability. Thank you guys for joining today.
Thanks for having us.
Typically, we start with the news headlines, but Irene, if you can pull up our survey for today, I think it would set a good tone for the discussion. So our survey for today is planned investment in clean energy worldwide must rise by 30%, reaching $131 trillion by 2050 in order to hit climate targets. Are the green recovery pledges made so far enough to close this gap? Either yes or no. You guys can vote by clicking and submitting. As we have our attendees voting, Cornelius, I just wanted to start off with you. Of course, looking at the headlines from this week, we have Irina, who's again hitting the echo of the narrative to speed up the growth of renewable energies. We have multiple international organizations who are phasing out coal financing. Hydrogen is popping up again. What are the headlines from this week do you think that really stood out to you, and ones that the audience should bring to attention?
Well, I think the HSBC one, phasing out coal financing, and probably also the AXA of RWE, they are closely linked. And this is basically connected to the paradigm shift that took place last year on capital markets. And I think people still cannot grasp today how profound these changes are, because this has such important implications for any equity or debt financing of the large companies. And, looking at the pressures now at first examples of, active investors, really scrutinizing and successfully pushing companies in a direction where there's no clear ESG strategy. This is a very, very important one. So ESG is, of course, you need to be careful. It's sometimes a bit of a buzzword, but this whole trend and the implications are just profound. And on the debt side, more and more banks and HSBCs, actually a late mover, are simply not providing debt for any fossil fuel projects anymore. And I think this has so important implications, because it's not only about, how much the oil demand will go down over the next few years, in my personal opinion, much faster than many think, with the disruptive decade ahead. But, it's simply a question as well on whether there is any financing available for fossil fuel projects. So I think in this sense, the defossilization, how we call it, will probably get a pace. That's the headlines that struck me. Yeah,
and looking at that too, I think it's by 2050. Do you think these initiatives are really going to turn the dial in the sense where, the wider picture? If we look at coal, I believe you still had Chinese imports of coal that were still pretty high this year in the pandemic. I don't know if it's going down by any means in that sense. Do you think that this will be really the trigger to turn the dial on that? Or do you think that wider scope or wider initiatives are going to have to be implemented in order to reduce those aspects?
Well, I think last year has seen a massive paradigm shift in terms of really, realizing the public that climate change is an acute and a much bigger threat than the pandemic, and that we have really little time to act. So, Fridays for Future, I think in this respect, they did a great job. And, many countries, companies, an unprecedented wave moving to net zero by 2050. Now, the important thing is that the next 10 years, this decade, is actually crucial, because, the 2040s, they're pretty irrelevant. Really to stop now and to reduce massively in the next 10 years and to to use this window we have, to still reduce the warming as much as possible. This is really crucial. So I think we should all focus on immediate actions, immediate energy transition. And there's enough studies out proving that even by 2030, 100% renewable energy system is possible. So I think in this respect, we should all push towards immediate, fast actions. And I think over the next few years, we will see really a disruptive decade, because we have, as Tony Sabo always says, a convergence of different factors coming in. Extremely low cost electricity, which makes green molecules possible. Green molecules is a revolution on its own. E-mobility, big mover, and it will have probably a much faster offtake than many of us think. And different aspects of the energy transition coming together, probably quite different technologies as well, really revolutionizing energy systems. And I think we need to contribute really to make this development happen as fast as possible.
Anita, I just wanted to bring you in to build on Cornelius. He just said that it is a possibility of 100% renewable energy by 2030. Of course, there's a difference between possibility and implementation and bringing that into reality. What are your thoughts on that? And also, building on that too, which really stood out to you this week in terms of the headlines that you saw?
So I absolutely agree with Cornelius with everything that he said, and it's not that it's a possibility. It can happen, but there has to be government support in making this happen. There has to be legislation in place that makes it easier for renewables and all types of movement away from the dependence on fossil fuel. It's like the world is addicted to coal and to oil and gas, and because it's there, it's natural. But we have to take care of it. I think we were moving towards sustainability, and people are using COVID as an excuse to go back to business as usual. Whenever I speak to people and they say, oh, I can't wait for it to go back to normal. What does that mean? That normal that was not a good normal. So you can't walk forward looking backwards, because you'll hit walls. And I would rather that, take COVID and learn from it and support to come back to sustainability and back to supporting these renewables. What HSBC, even though they're late, it's a good move. It's a big move. They're a big bank, an international bank, and it's important for them to make this noise in the market to say that we are now not supporting coal. China is a difficult market to control. I mean, they have their own agenda. They have a lot of coal and it's cheap, but it is what it is. So instead of focusing on the mistakes that we might feel that they're mistakes, we should focus on what we can do to support in this region that celebrates innovation. We should see what we can do that can make a louder noise and make it happen much better. I mean, for me,
when we look at this
efficiency
region,
is critical. Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry to interrupt. When we look at this region, it's at current times right now, coming out of the pandemic, oil prices are hovering around $70 per barrel again. Of course, some countries looking to recoup some revenues have been lost this year. Do you think this region right now, in this moment of time, is at great risk of going back to that, normal way of doing things, let's say? Do you think that's going to impede the energy transition as they focus more on, things opening up at the moment?
I don't think so, because I think if you look at Saudi Arabia as an example, and maybe Cornelius will support me in this, the change that they're making is significant. And that's a country that relies on oil. So they should be celebrating that the oil prices have gone up, because that absolutely will help them. But does that mean that they step away from all of the moves that they're making towards a sustainable and renewable energy future? No. I mean, it should go hand in hand. We were having a brief discussion before the panel started that we need to all sit at the table together. We need to support each other. Coal is not going to disappear, and neither is oil. But do we go back to the wasteful way that we were living? No, we shouldn't. We should use our resources, reuse the resources that are out there, and make the change happen together. And governments, I think, are understanding this, and I think they're supporting it. I really hope that it won't go back to dependence on oil and gas and coal. I don't know, Cornelius, maybe you can add to this.
We had an interesting comment from the CEO of a global, let's say, financial institution this week, who said that in order to go green, we have to go pretty black first, in the sense where it still requires fossil fuels to make this transition, as well as bringing metals out of the ground to electrify, of course, the globe in a lot of senses. But Cornelius, just want to bring you in on that too, to gather your thoughts and your opinion, just building off of what Anita just provided.
Yeah, well, look, I find this quite an astonishing statement, and maybe also to support on what Anita said. I think Saudi is the best example here in the region. Saudi is the world's the world's largest oil producer and exporter. Saudi is the largest economy in the GCC, in a certain sense representative on what's happening. Saudi is in a huge transformation on its own. Look at what's happening in NEOM. NEOM, the world's largest green hydrogen project, the statements by the Saudi energy minister that Saudi wants to become also the world's largest hydrogen exporter. This is very powerful, and he said also just a few weeks ago that Saudi could potentially pipe green hydrogen to Europe, if there's a business case for this. So these are very important statements. Now, I think a very important point is the level playing field. And in the past decade, the main obstacle for a fast uptake for renewable has been fossil fuel subsidies. But while a few years ago the end of the fossil fuel subsidy started, we see an accelerated shift. And I wouldn't give it more than 5 years until countries like Saudi or Egypt, they completely phase out fossil fuel subsidies. Maybe even faster. And, this would give the whole development a massive push. So I'm pretty positive, that same to Anita, that things will not go back to the normal here, that, many have understood the message, and that the greatest crisis in the history of energy, last year, has really such profound implications. And technologies are there. We are black in many countries today. We don't need to go black. We need to go away from black. We need to go step by step green. We've seen entire countries running already today on renewable energy. I'm from Germany originally. Germany has had actually 51% of all produced electricity by renewable sources last year. And Germany is, the country with the largest industrial base, so a huge energy consumer. So I think in this sense, there's only one way, which is also shown by the Green Deal in Europe, which is a green recovery, which will create not only big economic benefits, and not only huge environmental benefits, save our planet, but even many jobs. And even here in the region, this is the big opportunity, to provide many of the people employed in oil and gas, for example, a new perspective. So this is so important, to have a stability, to look at the socioeconomic impacts of the energy transition as well, to provide, people with a sustainable and, a stable perspective.
Would you say that, of course, coming out of this energy crisis, and if we look at the next 12 months ahead, would you say one of the key pillars of maintaining this momentum would be partnerships, international partnerships, let's say? So if you look at the German Energy Agency, of course, you have Saudi Arabia. Do you think that needs to accelerate in order to keep momentum, sharing of knowledge, expertise around the current environment in the energy transition?
Yeah, well, I think partnerships are really the basis to making this happen. We are all people, and our work, we always say we are connecting people, we are connecting continents, and international partnerships, they are so important. Let me maybe give you an example in the hydrogen field. Germany has, established a 2 billion euro facility for international partnerships on green hydrogen. And this is used for different purposes, helping, assisting countries in studies to assess the potential locally and for export, helping to get projects off the ground, bridging the gap between, gray and green hydrogen, for example. But more importantly, there is an entity now being implemented to run regional auctions, to source huge amounts of green molecules. And this entity will buy on behalf of the German government and on sell to off-takers in Germany. So this is one example, and also the partnership with Saudi in this respect, and recently Morocco, Egypt. But obviously there's many other governments. There's partnerships with Europe. There's also partnerships, with Asia, and Australia has big potential as well in green hydrogen, or countries like Chile. So, we all need to work together, and these international partnerships, I think they're so important for, getting an understanding on what is possible, what is happening in other markets, and, joining forces. So I would 100% agree. We should all focus on partnerships and making them happen.
Anita, I just want to bring you in as well. Cornelius just briefly touched on technology and adoption, as well as hydrogen being a new technology that's occurring. And of course, coming from your background as well, in terms of these waste management projects converting to energy. Do you see that the environment right now in the Middle East is getting better in terms of technology adoption? We talk about theoretically a lot of initiatives that can help propel the energy transition here. But of course, adopting it and putting it into implementation is a little bit different. What's your perspective on that element in terms of the region?
So I think regionally it's moved forward simply because it's a learning process, and we had a huge learning curve that has happened. We were speaking before, and Saudi Arabia, which is one of the big movers and one of the countries that everybody looks at, sat silent for a long time and watched what happened. And I think they learned a lot of lessons. And one of the major ones is that you have to allow people to come in and show you what they're doing. And we have to sit at the table and open the doors and discuss. Landfills, I'll go back to my favorite topic. This region is still landfilling. There are many landfills that are producing methane. Well, methane is one of the big benefits that can help produce green hydrogen. It's through steam methane reforming that they can break down the molecules. And in the end, if you can use hydrogen, your end product is water. So who doesn't need water? Like I'm totally simplifying it, but the fact is that it's an expensive process. But if you have a landfill and you can get the methane and power from that methane for a low cost, and support projects like ours that need support to have these landfill gas projects, then you have a source to give a boost to the whole industry. And at the same time, you reduce the impact that landfills have on the environment. You reduce the waste that's going to the landfill, and you start moving towards a sustainable, circular economy, circular energy path that we should be taking. I mean, I don't, to me, it's so exciting that there is now an opportunity for all these technologies to work together with solar, with wind on top of the big landfills with hydrogen fuel coming from landfill, and with government supporting it, with understanding being there, with NEOM project. It's like there are so many things that are happening that you don't even know where to look. But I think we should just keep focused on the future and allow it to happen. That's another thing. You know, can we do it? Yes. Should we do it? Absolutely. But we have to allow it to happen. And I think that that's happening, I hope.
Exactly. And just touching on the future, Irene, can you bring up the survey results from earlier? So planned investment in clean energy worldwide must rise by 30%, reaching $131 trillion by 2050 in order to hit climate targets. Again, are the green recovery pledges made so far enough to close this gap? 44% yes, 56% no, kind of split on that. Anita, just back to you. I wanted to get your comments on this survey. Do you think that enough is being done? Or of course, more needs to be done in order to hit those pledges by the time frame given?
Well, unfortunately, I clicked no because I don't think enough is being done. And I think that there is space for it to happen. It comes down to economics and political will. So if the political will is there, then it will help the economics to catch up to it. But right now, nobody is doing a charity work in making renewable energy happen, and it's an expensive process. So, for example, the carbon market crashing and collapsing is not a help. Carbon projects, carbon market helps companies like ours exist and grow. It's an added revenue. And it's an indicator on how you're doing and how you're reducing the carbon footprint. So I don't think enough is being done. I'm hopeful that more can be done and will be done. And I hope that we can reach these targets. Yeah.
And Cornelius, I just want to get your thoughts as well. Of course, as we've both stated in those headlines, the IEA is saying things need to progress faster. And I think that's a narrative that we tend to see every year, right? We'll see it moving forward. Do you think enough is being done? What were your opinions on how you voted and the results?
That's a good point, Brian, because the IEA is typically not at the forefront of the energy transition, for example, underestimating solar in the past. But of course, the IEA is a very powerful and organization with great report and an amazing team. So such a statement coming from the IEA, I think, is even more powerful. And also, I think statements the IEA made recently that solar is the cheapest form of energy in history. I think this is quite striking. So if the IEA says more needs to be done, then I think it is very clear that this is really what reality is. And I would definitely agree with Anita as well. So more needs to be done. I wouldn't say generally only more. I think, as I said initially, speed is key. So we're talking about 2050 pledges, recovery, but things like in the 30s and 40s are pretty irrelevant. What we all need to focus now on immediate actions. And in this sense, I like the Green Deal, for example, because many elements of the European Green Deal point towards a very clear execution and a bold execution by 2030. And this is what we need to point on. We need to be very aggressive, very ambitious to make things happen short term. And we need to track, the progress. This is really the thing. And also supporting what Anita said, of course, there needs to be more political commitment, willingness, setting the framework, improving the creation of a level playing field here in the region, for example. And I think in this sense, obviously, governments need to focus very much on this and not forget, in the situation of the pandemic, in going back to any strange kind of normal, because climate change is obviously a huger threat, and we cannot fight against climate change in 10 years from now. If you do nothing, then the battle is already lost. So we really need to act now.
Yeah, I agree. And as you mentioned, Anita said political will is a key ingredient to this. From your perspective, Cornelius, what do you think? Again, we see these headlines like the IEA, the EU is doing great initiatives in terms of the Green New Deal. Biden now in the US is pushing in their energy transition there as well for this region. What tangible steps can kind of, let's say, prod that political will forward? Do you think it's more communication channels around energy transition? Do you think it's solely based on economics, or is it a wider aspect that might be slowing things down?
I just want to say, I just want to put a small thing. All we're doing, Brian, is talking. Everybody is talking about it. More committees, and it goes to committee. And Cornelius can tell me if I'm right or wrong. When something goes to committee, it dies.
It goes to the bookshelf.
We need to actually stand on that diving board and jump off and hope there's water in the pool. I mean, make sure there is some water in the pool, but we need to dive off the diving board. We need to make things happen now. We've talked about it enough. We know that's happening. Everybody knows it's happening. So it's like when governments here come to me and say, well, what if the gas stops in the landfill? It won't stop because it's generated from the decaying waste. You're like understanding and action. That's what we need. Sorry.
Cornelius, you want to build on that as well?
No, I completely agree, and the work you're doing, Anita, as well, and methane, emissions at landfills are so harmful. So all of this is of extreme importance, and governments need to set the framework to stop this, and they need to act absolutely. Let me give you maybe a concrete example on what needs to be done. So I think last year, staying with the hydrogen example, we saw a wave of permanent national hydrogen strategies from different European countries, the European Commission itself, so on and so forth. Amazing objectives, even near-term objectives like 6 gigawatt of electrolysers, 24. But now is the time for execution, and now there needs to be a clear execution roadmap and most importantly a policy roadmap. So governments need to implement the policy framework for getting this done, and tracking year by year. This is now what is warranted, but it's just an example. Of course, we are looking at the energy transition from a holistic point of view, and there's many more things than just green hydrogen, but it's on many fronts. Another field which is of extreme importance, Anita briefly touched on this, is the CO2 price. So Germany, for example, implemented an increasing CO2 price over the next few years for different sectors. We are not talking about the power sector only. No, it's about mobility, it's about heating, it's here in the region, for example, about cooling. So a CO2 price is obviously, the most effective, the most universal measure, to tax harmful emissions and, to create a level playing field as well, and accelerate, in this sense, automatically the transition.
So saying, again, of course, the framework and the roadmap and the policy and the structure behind it, of course, we're seeing the 2030 visions, 2025, 2050 visions, ADNOC, their massive CAPEX plan, hydrogen's, a part of that as well, which came out. Do you see that at the moment being more PR, or do you think that it's just the beginning for, let's say, that beginning step before framework comes into it and structure and monitoring of it?
Yeah, well, I wouldn't want to comment on specific companies now. Of course, some
just
companies,
in general, not specific.
Some companies, they love to do greenwashing. The good thing is, that the world is not stupid. Today, it's much more difficult to do greenwashing, and I think this is, of course, increasingly scrutinized. And obviously, we are looking, at a much more holistic view today. For example, on the value chain, on if you talk about oil and gas, for example, methane emissions at exploration stage or transport stage, at emissions there, or what will happen, for example, to to capture CO2, using this for enhanced oil recovery, or pressing it in the ground, of course, has quite significant negative implications. So if you use it for industrial purposes, for example, directly, that's a completely different case. So recycle in a certain way and put it back in, in a virtuous circle. So I think there is, of course, some countries was marketing, some countries still completely sleeping. But I think, this positive wave now creates an unprecedented positive pressure. And I think these partnerships as well, and that's, of course, the core of our work as well, to help countries, to help different stakeholders, to understand what's really going on all aspects of the energy transition towards emission-free technologies. And that's a really exciting time, because I see countries moving in a pace towards, for example, green hydrogen, towards green electrons. Renewable energy is obviously a prerequisite for this, at a completely, let's say, unheard magnitude. And just maybe a year or two ago, I personally would have never expected that these countries are really moving in such a bold way now, and elaborating bold strategies, bold objectives. So I think there's, this positive peer pressure here in the region, internationally, that really no one can afford to do greenwashing, to do marketing. So of course this will be all uncovered, but more than that, I think it's just a necessity. It's an economic necessity. It's a matter of survival. That's how it is. So the development will move faster. I'm pretty confident on this.
It seems that 30 minutes is coming to a close. Time tends to be going faster nowadays. Anita, I just wanted to bring you back in as well to get your final thoughts and closing comments. Of course, as we look for the year ahead, and what you're watching, and what should be on everyone's radar, let's say.
Well, I can't really say much more than how Cornelius ended. I really think that we have to put our money where our mouth is, and governments have to support renewable energy, and they have to continue on the path that they're on right now, and don't look back. I mean, looking back will not get us there. Can we do it? Yes, we can. Should we do it? Absolutely, we should. And we need to all sit at the table together. We need to work together. Solar is lowest price ever. Solar should be all over the place. You can cover a landfill with solar, but you need to degas that landfill first. So that doesn't put me out of work. It actually should bring me more work. And our sector, the renewables and sustainability, this sector is in a growth period right now. And I think that we should ride that wave and actually make changes happen. And hopefully we're all sitting here as pioneers, and 20, 30 years from now, they'll be talking about these recordings.
Well, thank you very much, Anita, and of course, Cornelius, for joining us today and sharing your insights. For those listening to the podcast right now, please feel free to follow both of them for updates and, of course, intelligence that they're sharing on social media. We'll be posting this podcast immediately after this to our Twitter and LinkedIn feed. And we look forward to further engagements in the future with you both. Thank you very much for your time. We appreciate it.
Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you, Anita.
Thank you both.